Shopping in the 1980s was a unique experience. This was a time when shopping malls ruled the world and browsing around them was a popular weekend activity. These were places where people gathered and socialized, and it was much better than Facebook or Instagram. The best part about it is how it was all free, or at least it could be. Shopping malls provided hours upon hours of free entertainment. In this video, we will explore some of the 80s stores we spent hours in without spending money. Toys R Us was the ultimate store for a kid in the 1980s. They had every toy that you could ever want, and then even some toys that you didn't know you wanted until you saw them. It was a toy paradise where you could spend hours just aimlessly wandering the aisles. If you wanted to try out the latest Nintendo games, then they had designated playing stations just for that. Everywhere you turned, there could be some massive display of Transformers, G.I. Joes, Barbies, Cabbage Patch Kids, Legos, and so much more. This was the kind of place that you could get lost in, but still have fun. Even if you didn't have any money to spend, it was still very exciting. Radio Shack in the 1980s was one of the coolest places you could ever go to. They had all of the latest gadgets that you could check out and press buttons. Maybe you had your eye on a computer or a robot, but they also had more simple things like a calculator or a CB. And if you were into tinkering around with different electronic components, they had everything you needed to fix something or try to build something of your very own. The best thing about this store is that you could take your time and learn a lot. There never was any sales pressure to buy. Spencer Gifts was a haven for teenagers. They had all sorts of novelty items, but they also had a little bit of forbidden items. In the back of the store, they had quite the collection of posters that you could purchase, but most teens just gawked at them. The store also had a huge collection of black lights, lava lamps, and disco balls. If you had the money, you could really turn your room into a nightclub. Spencer Gifts was also known for their gag gifts and pranking items. The store had plenty of items that pushed parental boundaries, and if you saw a group of kids gathering around and laughing, they were probably looking at something that they shouldn't have been. Oftentimes, kids might come out of the store with a lot more questions over adult humor because they simply did not understand. Walden Books was a bookstore chain that was often found in shopping malls. They had a wide variety of books as well as a huge magazine section. The best part about the store is that the staff never cared if you lingered in there a while. In fact, they seemed to invite that with their comfy chairs located in the corners of the store. It was almost like a library that you could browse through the magazines, read a whole comic book, or start reading a book. If you did not finish the book, then go to lunch and come back later. They really didn't care. You could repeat this day after day and never spend a penny. Now that might be part of the reason why they are no longer in business. Long before we had music streaming services and digital downloads, we had the record store or music store. The premier music store was Sam Goodie. This was the place to go if you had an afternoon to kill and you wanted to flip through some records or cassette tapes. Back then, we all thought it was exciting just to look through the album art. The store also had some cool t-shirts and posters that most teens wanted in their room. While you looked around, you could stop by the headphone listening stations where you could sample the albums before deciding whether or not you should come back and buy it. The store also had some televisions that were playing some of the latest music videos. Since it was all free, what was there not to like about it? KB Toys was not as large as Toys R Us, but many kids still loved it. This store was found in malls and they had a lot packed inside. They had little hands-on displays that made it virtually impossible to leave quickly. The store itself was filled with all sorts of noises, from remote-control cars, moving robots, weasels, and various other moving toys. They also had a large selection of stuffed animals that kids couldn't resist squeezing. This was the perfect place to leave your kids if you stepped into another store nearby. It sort of had a playground feel. Hickory Farms was the type of store that they tried everything possible to lure you in. Out in front, it looked like a down-home farm that made you feel welcomed. There was always an employee out front that was giving away some samples of cheese, summer sausage, and crackers. Once you went inside there were even more samples. If you timed it just right, you could get a whole meal out of these free samples. It was a lot like a trip to Grandma's farm. Babages was a chain of computer software stores that really fascinated anyone who was into early computer technology. They had a lot of games and manuals that you could pick up off of the walls and shelves and then examine them at full length. For anyone that was into early gaming, this was a paradise where you could go in and dream of what you wanted next. Some of the locations even had computers set up where you could give some of the games a test drive. Think of it as a free arcade. The Sharper Image was a high-end gadget store. These were usually located inside shopping malls, and they were always packed with people. This was the place where you could spend a lot of time in and never buy anything. Everything in there seemed a little futuristic, and it was incredibly expensive. No one could resist trying out the massaging chairs or various other electronics and bizarre inventions. The Sharper Image store also had a catalog that was sent out, and it was like an entertainment magazine all of its own. I myself loved going into the store, and I spent hours in there, but I never bought anything. Camelot Music was another music store chain that had listening stations and comfortable seating areas. They were also known for hosting occasional live performances as well as musical artist meetups. When they did this, it was super packed and it became a free spectacle of its own. Every mall seemed to have that one music store that sold music instruments and most often was in the form of pianos and organs. There was always that one guy out in front rocking away on the piano while he gathered a large crowd around him. He was strategically placed there to get you to go in the store and buy a piano. I don't think I ever saw anyone purchase one, but we all treated this guy like he was a rock god while we were watching him and eating our hot dog on a stick. In reality, if he wasn't there, he probably would have never drawn a crowd. You may not have went in the store, but you certainly spent some time outside of it. Malls during the 80s always had an arcade. It was always full of flashing lights and sounds, and that sort of led you in there. Even if you had no quarters to spend, it was still fun to peruse and check out some of the newest arcade games. It was not uncommon to see a group of people gathered around to watch some guy who seemingly mastered this new game. When he finally finished, he may even be met with a round of applause. The Nature Company was sort of a science and nature store that was found in many malls. They had all sorts of rocks, kaleidoscopes, and desktop toys that captivated visitors. The Nature Company store also had all kinds of art and jewelry. They were also known for their nature sounds that you could listen to on headphones. Kids that came into the store were mesmerized by the sand art displays and the little frames that had pen art impressions. There's no telling how many kids put their face in that and just shared germs. This store was pretty much like going to a free science museum that had a lot of hands-on exhibits. As you can see, many of the stores were located inside shopping malls. And these malls were actually hours upon hours of free entertainment. Many of the food courts offered free samples. Then you could swing by Foley's or Dillard's for some free perfume or cologne sprays. These malls usually had some sort of water fountain, and sometimes the fancier malls even had a fountain show. Shopping malls back then were chock full of different clothing and shoe stores where you could browse and even try some things on. It was all free entertainment, which was great, but sadly many of these old stores and malls have closed. Perhaps we should have spent a little bit more money in them to keep them around, but not everyone could do that, and that's okay. I'm just glad I got to experience some of these shopping malls and stores in their prime. What are some of the stores you enjoyed going into and never spent any money? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.